Hello and welcome to the TGH College Hardwood Podcast. I'm Joe. With me is Greg. As always, we are here to recap a week of college basketball and preview the next week. Greg, we've had some pretty good conference games already, and it's going to get even crazier this week with some of the games we have this upcoming Saturday. How are you doing?
It's where the rubber meets the road. I was going through this week trying to pick what games we should pick, and I feel like I was having trouble deciding what games were more important than the others, especially if you just literally look at the SEC slate. So I picked what I thought was most important, but I'll definitely be watching more games than just the ones we pick, which I do in general. But we're hitting full swing, man. There's a lot.
Yeah, it's just with the conference expansion, it feels like there's even more to watch. I know there's still the same number of teams generally in the power conferences, but it feels like there's more to watch on a week-to-week basis. There's more big games every single week because of this, especially with conferences like the SEC that have just so many good teams that we're going to be having a lot of good matchups that we'll talk about here in a little bit. Greg, let's start with our recap of last week. We have on Tuesday a big upset. West Virginia goes into Lawrence, Kansas, and wins for the first time ever in Allen Fieldhouse. This is a really impressive win for West Virginia because they didn't have a lot of their top players, including Tucker DeVries, the son of the coach DeVries for West Virginia. So that kind of like makes things tougher, but they've been playing pretty well even since he's been injured. And that's what makes this win so good for them, because when he comes back, you would think that they could maybe be a tournament team, which is not something you maybe necessarily saw in their first year. Javon Small had a pretty good game in this one with 13 points, all while shooting 0 for 6 from the three-point line. So they definitely have some work to do there. And Greg, Kansas, it's like one of these things where they kind of have four guys again. It's kind of weird, but like a lot of their transfers aren't paying off. Like Zeke Mayo went off in this one for 27 points, but AJ Storr had 0. Rylan Griffin only had 3 points. These are guys we thought would have major impacts and would help score, and they'd almost have too much talent and have to figure out a rotation. And we got to a point where now they're just not getting enough from anyone besides Zeke Mayo, really, from the transfers.
Yeah, we felt really confident about this team real early in the year, and then it all of a sudden they beat Duke, and but then the trouble started when the loss at Creighton, and Creighton hasn't exactly been at their best, and it's just kind of up and down. I think this team is still figuring things out. I'll trust Bill Self. The only other things we want to mention about this game in particular is West Virginia is pretty shorthanded. No Tucker DeVries, and I know they were missing a couple other pieces. So this isn't like a case where West Virginia's been playing good this year, but like this isn't like their full strength team going in. I mean, the game was at Kansas. Like this is a bit of a surprise, even considering that Kansas has been a little bit up and down. And then you go look at the fact that they go and play at UCF, a place that they lost last year. And I mean, they obliterate them 99 to 48. So I don't know, Joe. I mean, like, it's tough to decide where this team is going to end up. I think there's definitely a lot of room. I heard a lot of the echoes of kind of what you said. It's like, like what did they get from the portal? Those things kind of haven't been working out. But I think you still have to, if you were gonna after this game, after this West Virginia game, if it was a chance to like buy low, like if you're buying Kansas stock in Rothsteinian terms, like I would say you can see the potential there, and we saw it in the very next game. So the thing is like this could very well end up being an elite team in terms of Sweet 16, Elite 8 or better, but they're not there right now. There's too much inconsistency. Guys are going to have to get more defined roles, kind of like you already said. Self shook up the starting lineup a little bit, putting Shaquille Moore in, and that AJ Storr and Bedinga had a better game off the bench. So I think he's just going to have to plug and play and see what works. But this team in particular is definitely concerning. Obviously, if you're a Kansas fan, you're happy they went and turned it around the next game, but just going to have to – I feel like I say this about a lot of teams right now, but just going to have to kind of keep an eye on them. But keep an eye on them in terms of, like, are they going to rise back to the elite of the elite, or are they just going to kind of sit in this, like, maybe, like, 10th to 20th best team in the country kind of, like, area?
Yeah, definitely worth keeping tabs. Not a chance to. Not, or it is a chance to panic if you want to, but not like a for me a chance to panic. Not it's not something that, you know, last year this team was constructed much poorer. I guess in much more poor fashion than this one. There are still some of the same issues with the paint cloggers and with DeJuan Harris just not sometimes being able to shoot the ball as much as you would like. A lot of guys who handle the ball these days, but they have enough talent. It's just more about Bill Self figuring it out. I think I'm going to trust Bill Self to figure it out. I'm sure that's kind of the approach you're taking, Greg. Kind of what it seems like is just like, you know, keep tabs on them, but don't sell the farm yet. Just kind of see how they're going to do. You know, if it was like end season ended right now, I don't know if I'd pick them in my final four, but do I think Bill Self could get them to a point by the end of the season where I would pick them? Absolutely, I do think he could do it. So we'll keep tabs on Kansas as we move along. Let's go to Thursday. We have Illinois and Oregon. Greg, this was one that we picked last week. We both took Illinois, who I believe were underdogs in this game, and they killed them, 109-77. That is, I mean, again, just something we didn't really see happening. We thought maybe, you know, a little bit of trouble with the West Coast trip, you know, maybe make it a little bit close, but it is a really good Illinois team this year that, again, we didn't see coming in the preseason, but we've kind of seen early on in the season that they could be maybe the Big Ten's best team if they play up to their potential. And I don't even know where to start because they had so many guys play well in this game. I'm not like Oregon, you know, they're still fine, and we're going to talk about them for in the future because they're this Big Ten. They're going to have a big role to play in how things finish, I think. But man, just about anyone who could have had a good game for Illinois in this one just about had one. So pretty good for them.
Yeah, you know, we kind of mentioned earlier, you know, we're kind of curious how, you know, this whole Big Ten teams and you know, obviously some other conferences, how the Big West travel was going to go for them. And, you know, Illinois put that to bed, you know, with absolute certainty that that's not really going to affect them, at least at the start. Maybe we'll see some wear and tear as the season goes deeper and later, and some teams that got to travel west after, you know, kind of getting torn apart by SEC and you know, Big Ten and whatever. They're just their conference schedules in general. But this game, there was no doubt, literally one bucket away from all five starters being in double figures. They got two double-figure guys off the bench. Will Riley only gave him 5 points, and like he's had great. It's like, you know, there's plenty to talk about with this team. I'm on the same page with Joe on this one. This team definitely has become something that is much better than we thought they were going to be in the preseason. Up there is, you know, probably the leader in the clubhouse for winning the Big Ten right now. I mean, like, I know correct me if I'm wrong, I think we both picked Purdue in the preseason, right?
Yeah. There's just no one else to honestly take. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like that's kind of just, you're right. I mean, it's kind of a knee-jerk reaction. You know, we knew some of the pieces that were coming back, but this team has some good parts. You know, Colin Boswell definitely much improved from last year after he comes over. The Jakutionis kid, who everybody's going to learn how to pronounce by hopefully by March. You know, he's obviously having a fantastic year. I went into this week with Oregon kind of like, you know, like I don't know what to think of them. They do go on and we'll talk about that. I mean, we can take more time or whatever, but they go on and they beat Maryland later in the week. So, you know, I think there's potential to this Oregon team. I'm not going to really fault them for this loss, except for the fact that, you know, obviously you had a little bit of an advantage with Illinois having to come, you know, 1,500 plus miles west. So,
yeah, don't want to have to give up on Dana Altman and what he can do, but Illinois I think Kasparis is going to be one of these guys that we want to watch in March. We want people to pay attention to. We want people to see how. A lot of people who don't like college basketball kind of like, oh, it's not high level, it's not this, it's not that. Like, this guy's playing some really high level basketball. He's going to be in the NBA next year. This is a guy that I think would be really cool to see in the tournament. So hopefully they keep this up. Hopefully they get a good seed, and hopefully they go on a little bit of a run. That's kind of like how stars are made, and it'd be really cool to see him kind of be one of those guys. Next one up, we're going to move on to Saturday, Greg. We're going to go to the Florida-Kentucky game. This one was at 11 a.m., the earliest tip in Rupp Arena history, I believe, is what they said. This is because of the schedule they had leading up into the NFL Saturday games for Week 18. I was about to say NFL playoff games, but that's this week. This was a slow start for Kentucky, but then they bounce back and they start hitting some threes. And this was like one of those games where I think they kind of got exposed for some of their flaws. We saw Chinyelu really hit the glass on them, specifically the offensive glass, and kind of really make Kentucky struggle in that way. We saw Walter Clayton score 33 points. We saw Elijah Martin score 26 and kind of expose some of the defense. But we also saw Kentucky have such a good shooting night. They shot 48.3% from three. Kobe Brea comes off the bench again and has one of his best games as a Kentucky Wildcat with 7 threes and 23 points. So it's still very much a team, to me, Greg, that is like, yeah, they can lose to like decent teams. Like they've lost to Ohio State, they've lost to Clemson. They can lose to decent teams if their shot's not on, but they can beat anyone in the country if they shoot the ball well, like they did in this one.
Yeah, I think the defense from both teams definitely left a lot to be desired, but I still think this is a case of we were looking at high-level elite offense, obviously good shot making, but it wasn't just one of those things where every single shot was wide open. I mean, like I can only think of a few times in my head where somebody got a wide open shot and missed, but I feel like a lot of these shots were contested or semi-contested. There were a few times where, I'm thinking to myself, why are you choosing to go under that screen with the way, and I said that about both teams, kind of with the way that the shooting was going. It seems like those little adjustments may not have been made. And I mean, like these are both teams that aren't necessarily elite of the elite defensively. And I think that's the thing that worries you about Kentucky. It's like, all right, on the nights where, the shot making isn't there, it's just kind of like you said, they might lose to some average teams, right? I'd like to see the defense come a little better, but I mean, when they're on, man, like they can beat anybody in the country. It's just when you get, kind of like that 7 out of 10 game or that 6 out of 10 game in terms of like, how well they're playing. That's what worries me is like, can they build that defense up? It almost feels like it's not quite the same, but I feel like we've talked about this with like the first team that comes to mind is like those Iowa teams that were so good on offense and the defense just wasn't there. Now this Kentucky team is not that bad on defense,
right?
But I don't know if you think there's I mean, like they obviously got dudes, they got guys. There's potential there. This team is definitely going to be on the short list of I think national title contenders. I would like to see we know the offense is there. As we get further into SEC play, I don't think they need to be a top 10 defensive team, but I'd like to see them improve. I think last I checked, I think they were in it was 50s or 60s or something. And I looked at it today. I had it written down.
91.
It wasn't great. 91. Okay. So I must have been thinking of, was Florida in the fifth? I had both of them written down when I was rewatching that game last night. I know somebody was in
Florida is 36 right now.
36. That's what I'm thinking of.
Gotcha.
Okay, so obviously a little bit better defensively, but I still like Kentucky more coming out of this game. I will say, like we're not but a week removed from me picking Carolina to beat Florida. I just wasn't sure. I felt like they had a bit of a lighter schedule, and like I know they lost this game, but I walk away from this game saying, all right, Florida's for real too. Like there's nothing to, you went into Rupp. It's an early start. Like you put up 100. Yeah, obviously same thing with, we're going to say a lot of the same things about Florida that we are Kentucky. The defense left stuff to be desired, but it's one game. So I think both of these teams are good. I definitely think that Kentucky is looking better. And again, not just because they won the game, but just, where they're at right now. I like where they're at more than I do Florida, but don't get me wrong, man. Like there's going to be test after test after test in this SEC schedule. So I don't know about theirs in particular, but you can hazard a guess that pick a team in the SEC, they're probably going to have a tough schedule. This almost feels like one of those, like Big 12 a couple years ago where there's just almost no off nights kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever seen a league this good, to be honest, and it's
it's a league this good with this many teams. Like that's what makes it unprecedented. Is like we've gone to these conferences being expanded, and they're still this good.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is going to threaten the old Big East. Had 11 teams in the tournament. That's going to threaten that record this year if things hold steady. And there's I don't know how to put it, but like there's like 7-ish, 8 teams that I could see like making a run and going to like an Elite Eight, and that's crazy when you think about it. But then you kind of think about other conferences struggling. Specifically, like Big 12 only has 3 top 25 teams right now. Big East is struggling. Like there are some really good teams here. Off of your point, Greg, it is odd to me that the defense is so bad for Kentucky and definitely needs to improve. They have Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year in Lamont Butler. They have the CAA Defensive Player of the Year in Amari Williams at center. So they have a point guard and center, and then they have Tega Owe is a really good defender too on the wing. So I think sometimes efficiency can lie to us, but when you're that low, it's hard to say you can go win the national championship. We talk about that every time when we make our tournament picks. So that's something that like they have to maybe figure out how to change the lineup to get things moving. But they have all their good defenders in the starting lineup, and sometimes the offense struggles. So you're like, all right, let's move guys off the bench, and when Kirk Reese is healthy, let's put him in there. But then the defense suffers, and it's like, is that worth it? If like you're gonna give up a lot of points, but you're gonna make a lot of shots too. So there's still like I think their potential is to possibly be a top 25-ish defensive team, but it's really hard to see what changes they have to make to get there when their best defenders are already in the starting lineup. So that's one of the concerns I have moving forward with Kentucky is that their offense is great. You can't really complain too much. Maybe, and I like to get your thoughts on this too, Greg, but like I do think that there is some value of having a go-to guy, and they really don't have that. They have Jackson Robinson scored 14-something points a game off the bench for BYU last year. He's at 12 right now. He's had some good games. Then he had some bad games. He scored 1 at Duke. Lamont Butler hit that big shot to send San Diego State to the national championship game, but he's not like a guy you're really saying like you want this guy to shoot the ball at the end of the game. He's a guy you can say that he can dribble and maybe set up someone or maybe take his own shot. But that to me is like something that is good because Mark Pope will draw up a play for them. But I think at some point, like maybe they're out of timeouts, like in the NCAA tournament, like it kind of like thinks like, hey, my thought would be give it to Jackson Robinson and let him make a play, but it just hasn't been something that they've had like a go-to guy on a consistent level because Robinson's been up and down, and his best game was probably against Gonzaga when he had to play point guard too, which is just another little wrinkle in there. So I don't know if you think it's a big issue, but that is something I want to see them develop moving forward as kind of like a go-to guy in conference play.
Well, I mean, like I do see your point there. It does kind of feel like if they get into one of these games, like who's their safety net, right? If they get into one of these games where like just like obviously play great team offense, and they can spread the ball around, like we know that. But I'm with you that hey, if we get in one of these games where the shots just aren't falling, who's going to be our put your hard hat on and go get a bucket, however it is, whether it's creating your own shot, and I'm with you. I don't think that there's not guys that can do it on this team. I just think it's like, who is that dude or who's going to emerge as that dude, so that, who's taking the lead, who's taking the reins so that when you get into one of these situations, we know who to get the ball to, how we face it. And, I think that's, you look at their losses. I mean, like, the Ohio State and the Clemson loss, it's like, yeah, the ball kind of got spread around. I mean, like, Owe had a decent scoring night against Ohio State, but it's like you still need someone to consistently be that guy, like you're saying. I don't know how critical it is, but like situationally, we'll say it like this: I don't know how critical it is over a whole season, but situationally, I do think you need it. And when you start talking about tournament time, things get very situational as opposed to a bigger sample size.
Yeah, and you're right. Maybe it's something that doesn't really come up until the tournament. Maybe it's something that doesn't come up until they're in the Sweet 16 if they get that far. God bless if they do. But that is something I would like to see. And maybe those guys can rise to the occasion. Like, it wasn't like, in 2014 when Aaron Harrison was hitting those shots. It's not like he was the go-to guy before March. He was the go-to guy in March Madness, and they kind of seemed like they had that figured out. But he hit those big shots, and it was, like, it was just kind of crazy that like he wasn't like the for sure go-to guy on those teams either. So some things to figure out, but maybe not the biggest problems for Kentucky. Obviously, they're probably doing better than I think a lot of people would have expected coming into the year. But let's move on, Greg. We both got this one wrong. It was Arkansas at Tennessee. We both took Arkansas. because Tennessee is number one in the country, probably not the best team, but like 14-0, and probably it's fine if you want to say they're number one. It's fine if you want to say Auburn's better. I believe Auburn's better, but like it's fine if you want to rank Tennessee number one. It really doesn't matter in my opinion. But I thought, Greg, that like Arkansas's old school physical nature, having guys, including Duthiero, who's big and physical, Jonas Adu, who's big and physical, could really kind of combat this Tennessee team, because John Calipari teams in the past they've had that physicality and that length to kind of bother Tennessee teams offensively, and they can win some rock fights against them. But this one, there was nothing going for Arkansas. There was absolutely no shots falling down. On the other side, Chaz Lanier, he's doing about as good a job as you can do filling in for a guy like Dalton Connect. He's not the same player, but he's like filling a lot of the scoring needs. He had 29 points in this one, so they are definitely a force to be reckoned with. But my main point here, Greg, is I don't know where this Arkansas team goes. I think this is a team that's in danger in the SEC of being lost, and like they have some good wins on the resume already, but there's some problems. Like I love John Calipari for what he did for Kentucky, but they didn't do a shoot-around before this game. They hadn't done shoot-arounds before games before, and they've struggled. So you would think they would do a shoot-around, and they obviously scored 52 points. It probably would have helped. But John L. Davis has 0 points coming off the bench, 25 minutes. He's the guy who's supposed to be able to shoot the ball and open things up. They shoot 20.7% from three, and really makes them struggle. So I don't know where they go unless Nelly Davis kind of gets things going for them. Otherwise, this team might be on the way down the standings in the SEC.
Yeah, I mean, like I the first 5 minutes of this game started off okay. Got some drive and kick opportunities. I think Wagner had a three, and they were up, maybe 5 or 6 points. And then it's like the under 16 or under 12 timeout comes, and that Tennessee defense just like put it on lockdown, and that was kind of it. Like after that, like the game was pretty much over. It was never in question. I think the halftime lead was like 15 points or something. At that point, it was like, you had a thought that maybe there would be some adjustments coming out of half, and it just didn't happen. So I think I do think that like, yeah, we could talk about, where does Arkansas go? But I do think that we do need to give this Tennessee team a little bit more credit. I think we've kind of underwritten them as like they're number one, but like, everything comes with the but at the moment. But they have some talent. They have some options. I mean, Chaz Lanier has been great. A lot of their other portal ads have been great, or at least good enough to make them, a good team. I still don't think, and I don't think you would disagree, they're probably not the best team in the country. That's probably going to be Auburn, maybe Iowa State at this point, but I think they're still better than we're giving them credit for, especially on defense. But yeah, it's not Dalton Connect, but like they have some options on offense again this year. So look out for them being underestimated, even if they take a couple of lumps in SEC play. I could still see them getting to tournament time, and people kind of like, giving them the, yeah, they're in this league, but maybe they're not actually that good kind of thing. But I think this team is better than it's weird to say about a team that's ranked number one in the AP poll, but what the narrative has been, the last couple of weeks. Yeah, they're ranked number one, but are they really the best team in the country? And again, I don't think they're the best team in the country, but I still think they might actually be better than we're giving them credit for right now.
Yeah, I think part of it is preseason expectations. We just didn't expect Tennessee to be this good. Like, feeling Chaz Lanier playing as well as he has in place of Dalton Connect is kind of crazy. They also, a lot of their wins are ones that aren't their fault, but they aren't as good as we thought they were going to be. So they beat Louisville struggling. They beat Virginia struggling. They beat Baylor struggling. We're going to get to them in a second. Beat Syracuse, not as good as they used to be. Beat Miami, not as good as they used to be. They beat Illinois, and that was good. And now they beat Arkansas. So, like, it's been one of those things where, like, that's usually a pretty tough schedule, but this year it's just not the same. I think as they play more big games in the SEC, they'll get more credit. They'll get more recognition. They're going to play Florida this week. That'll be a really fun game to watch. And, yeah, it's definitely fair to say, hey, they deserve to be number one right now because they're undefeated, and, like, people can complain, like, oh, Auburn's better. Like, yeah, it's a little bit about, like, who's the best team in the country, but a lot of it is like Tennessee's a power conference team that hasn't lost and they haven't played a bad schedule, so just keep them at number one. That's kind of how I feel. But I would say they still have a long way to go for me to like trust them in March under Rick Barnes. Like he's done a great job the last last couple of years, but I do think that that like number one right now. I have reservations about what I'll do in March is what I'll say about this team. I do think they have a good shot to do just as well as they did last year, though. All right, so we'll move on to Baylor and Iowa State. Iowa State kills them 74-55. Pretty much control the game for pretty much all of it. This is just again, it reaffirms how well we feel about Iowa State, I guess is the best way to put that. Keyshawn Gilbert's been really huge for them. He scored 16 in this one. That's the leading scorer for them. They have a really tight rotation, but they're 8 guys, but they do a really good job. And it's kind of like a team effort where you just don't know who might go off on any given night. And that's kind of good for them, and it helps them win these games. But defense steps up in this one too, and that deserves a lot of credit, holding Baylor to 55 points. And now Baylor goes from being ranked 25 last week to being out of the top 25 poll and have some work to do. They only played 7 players in this one, and they shot really inefficiently from the field. Robert Wright was 4 of 17. Jeremy Roach was 5 of 14. No Chad Amirs and 3 of 11. So they have to figure things out offensively because, as we mentioned before, their defense hasn't been good in the past, and that's going to make things tough in the Big 12.
Yeah, this Iowa State team looks elite of the elite. One of the 2 or 3 teams that I feel like you can trust on any given night. And that doesn't mean they won't lose games, but at the moment their only losses to Auburn in Maui. So Tamin Lipsey's not been as good as he was last year, and that's I guess like what you can put as like the asterisk for this team. Like there's not a lot to complain about right now. They're playing really good ball. They're beating good teams, and I mean they're killing teams that are not necessarily at their level, but they're beating teams by more than I would expect. Like I was expecting them to win this game, and thank goodness that things are like making like. I feel like every week we come up with like a list of results just don't make sense, and at least here we got something to say. Okay, all right, this makes sense. I know what to do with this team. Even coming off the bench, they got guys that are Curtis Jones is an absolute microwave. It feels like every time he comes in, I feel like he would start for so many other teams. Maybe he's just one of those guys that is more suited to, come off the bench, and that's obviously how Otzelberger's chosen to play him, and it's worked. Not a lot you can pick with this team. Baylor's like the opposite, but like maybe we should have seen the writing on the wall as early as the Gonzaga game when they got obliterated, and it's like the defense isn't there, and so that means on the nights where the offense isn't there, they're going to struggle. But it's so hard with so much talent. I feel like you can say this about several teams with so much like just athletic talent, and on this team, they've definitely taken several notches down from where we thought they would be in the preseason. But like, this is just another one of those teams like on a different level from Carolina, but like it's just hard for me to quit them and say like I'm going to write them off as whatever. I still think there's potential for this team. Playing 7 guys at this point in the season is, interesting. I don't know if they got guys they're missing, but like that kind of shortened rotation you usually don't see until kind of the end of the season when things are figured out. So I don't know what your long-term thoughts on Baylor are. This is just another one of those teams that I get stubborn about, and like I feel like I can't quit what my thoughts on them, but the kind of results are what you'd expect for how they've been playing lately.
Yeah, I don't want to panic about them. Their 4 losses are to Gonzaga, Tennessee, UConn, and now Iowa State. Iowa State was the one on the road, and UConn was on the road as well, actually. But they I don't know how to put I don't know if they're like a national title contender, like maybe a lot of us thought at the start of the year, and I think part of that is like guys not quite stepping up. Part of it is the defense. They're ranked 52nd in KenPom. That's going to be tough. They have to keep on working on that. But I don't know, like if they get a 5 seed in the tournament, maybe win a game, is that good enough? I mean, it's definitely below expectations of what we thought was going to happen. But like that's kind of where I see them right now, is like a 5 seed, and I was going to save this point for when we get to the next, or two games from now when we're talking about. But like, you have to think the 4 losses stink, but the thing that really kills them is I'm not sure how these wins in the Big 12 are going to register, Greg. And that's maybe a larger conversation we can start now or we can finish later, but whatever we want to do with it. There are 3 ranked Big 12 teams this week, I believe, in the media poll. Kansas, West Virginia, and I'm missing one. Iowa State, I guess, is the other one, right? So that's crazy.
Houston,
that like
4.
Is there 4?
Houston, 4.
Houston, that's right, 4.
So,
4.
but I mean, like with West Virginia, kind of, we can get into that conversation again, but like I don't know what to do with them. Like you could easily see them bouncing in and out. I would say saying there's really 3 for now is probably fine, but in name there's 4, but we'll just have to keep on. But anyway, continue with your original point.
Right. So my point is, like, they may not be able to notch as many quality wins as you would think, and right. So like their next ranked game is against Kansas, and it's in February, so it's a month away. It's February 1st. Like that's kind of, that's tough. They only have 4 ranked games the rest of the way, and if you would have said that to someone in the Big 12 last year, you'd been like, you're crazy. Like this is Big 12. So I think they can rebound. I think they can still maybe even do better than a 5 seed. I think they can be a team that people are kind of scared about in March because they can light it up. But that sustained run with that defense, I don't think is going to be there. Like I don't think I can see this team making an Elite 8. They can get hot for a weekend and make the Sweet 16, but can it sustain that for an extra game after that? I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at with them. I don't know how you see it. I don't know if you want to make a comment about the Big 12. We still have one more Big 12 game to go over, but it very much does feel like they've only lost to very good teams, but I don't know where their impressive wins are going to come from. Yeah, they beat Arkansas. We don't know really how to feel about Arkansas right now, obviously. They beat St. John's. We don't know how to feel about them right now, obviously, either, because they've had some struggles too. So it's not all bad. It's just they haven't looked like they were supposed to look like at the start of the season.
I mean, there's some really good, like, net in terms of the net. There's some really good opportunities, assuming these net rankings hold. I mean, like, Iowa State's 5, Houston is 4, like Kansas 10. The net even still loves Arizona at 16. West Virginia's 25. Like, Baylor's still 24. UC's 32. Like, there's only 2 Big 12 teams outside of the top 100, and there's only like another 4 or 5 that are outside of the top 75. So like there's still, at least in name right now, there's still quad 1, quad 2 opportunities, both home and on the road. This still feels like one of those things where as we get a larger sample size, I don't know if I buy Arizona State as like a top 50 team.
Right.
Like I think these things will change. We haven't talked. We can talk about Cincinnati in particular when we get to that game, that result, and Arizona. But like I see what you're saying. Like this looks like kind of what you're saying. It's like it's a top heavy league between like Iowa State, Houston, and Kansas. And Houston and Kansas haven't even been what Houston and Kansas were supposed to be. Definitely kind of having up and down seasons. And it's weird to say when they only have 3 losses each, but like, there's more to the story with both Houston and Kansas when you start looking at that. So it's like one of those leagues where like they very well could end up with, at 1 or even 2 of the Final 4 teams, but like the middle of the pack probably isn't as strong as, some of the other conferences, and that, that might take away some of those opportunities. Like, yeah, right now the numbers look good, but I just don't think it stays like. I agree with you. I don't think it stays like that.
Yeah, it's just the way things are looking right now. So we'll keep tabs on the Big 12. Like we obviously some of the conference we've known as the best conference in college basketball the last couple years, but it just seems like it's different in the same way that like the SEC kind of dominated college football. Like NIL and things are changing, and it's just you got to kind of look at it by year basis and can't count on that conference to be the best every single year. Let's move on, Greg, to the Oklahoma-Alabama game. Speaking of the SEC, and a game that definitely kept Alabama out of the college football playoff for football. Alabama avenges that from the basketball side. They win 107-79. Mark Sears looks like he's doing great. 22 points in this one. And Oklahoma, we talked about it, Greg. It seemed like a two-man team. They did get production from other players, but this was mostly, to me, because Alabama was up so much, it was almost just firing away type of thing. It was like, I still feel like they're a team that's made up of two main scorers, and their ability to find other guys to get involved is going to be the key all season long for them. And I would, even though they had 5 double-digit scores, when you give up 107 and are down by 19 at the half, I mean, that's just going to happen. So Alabama kind of getting to the point where we thought they'd be, having to kind of like change the rotation a little bit. Latrell Wright's still out for the year, and we haven't really had a chance to check up on them all that much since. But they still have a very deep team, and they're kind of figuring out this rotation as they go.
Yeah, I mean, Alabama finally seems to be picking up to where we thought they'd be preseason. Obviously, LeBaron Philon has been, great for them. Had another great game. Mark Sears, has re-entered the National Player of the Year chat. Definitely not front runner or anything like that, but he's gotten himself back in the conversation. Definitely had some off time, early in the season, but picking it up during the beginning of the SEC schedule. I almost said Big 12 because I'm looking at the Oklahoma logo right now, and that still feels weird. But picking it up right when you're getting into the meat of SEC schedule is not a bad time to pick. Especially if you want to call it your Heisman moments where you start having big games, against big teams, and there's going to be plenty of those opportunities in the SEC. Again, I can pull up Alabama's schedule, but you can pretty much assume when you're talking about any SEC team that there's going to be multiple huge opportunities just because of the sheer number of ranked teams. And, I think I saw today, Joe, I think it's 14 in the top 50 of the net, which is insane. Absolutely insane. Mm-hmm. Oklahoma, I guess I'll plug something I've got going on here. I'm with you. I kind of maybe they're a little bit of a one-trick pony team. I'm picking them to lose. I think their game is Saturday against Georgia. And if we want to go on a little bit of a tangent, I'm actually picking Georgia to beat Kentucky as well. Ooh. I like some of the pieces that Georgia has. So this is picking my big week for Georgia to them kind of bring themselves onto because they win both those games, they're ranked next week, no question. Absolutely no question. Obviously I could be wrong, but it's one of those things where I started out picking, with Kentucky obviously coming off a huge game at Florida. Like, is the shooting going to stay the same? Georgia's got some good pieces between Asanuel and company. It's a road game. It's one of those things where you're picking games where none of these teams are going undefeated in the SEC. It's just plainly not happening. So you got to look for what makes sense, what might happen. Georgia's maybe a little bit better than we give them credit for, and then I see, okay, well, Georgia's also got another home game coming up that weekend, so it's going to be, according to me, it's going to be a big week for Georgia, and maybe Oklahoma takes a little bit of a slide. So to relate it back to this game.
Well, if that happens, it might be the biggest week of Georgia basketball since Anthony Edwards signed. And before, if you want to say Anthony Edwards maybe didn't get the best out of the talent there when he was there, like maybe since they went to the NCAA tournament I don't even know when the last time they would have a week as good as this. So that would be impressive.
I mean, their only losses are at Ole Miss and a neutral against Marquette. Like, the thing is they do have a lack of good, being outside of St. John's, they pretty much have a lack of good wins. All their other games are Q3, Q4, but I still think that there's some good dudes on that team, and just looking at the arcs of the teams that they're going against. Again, Kentucky coming off a huge game, maybe a little bit of a letdown. It's an early in the week game and whatnot, and then another weekend game at home. I mean, vibes could just be high.
Could be high.
They could lose both. They could lose both games. Well, I mean, not like vibes in the stadium, but just kind of like when if you get in a rhythm, you know how it feels. You played Joe's ball player for an
I don't know what you're talking about. I've never been to North in my life.
Played many sports. Has a crack in the skull. Does okay for himself. But you know how it feels when you're letting it go and everything feels like it's going in. And some of this is reading the tea leaves more than strict analysis. So again, they could lose both of these games, and I could look like an idiot. But if you look at some of my picks last week, they weren't the smartest things either, and some of them were right and some of them were wrong. This is one of those sports where weird things happen. So,
Greg, we got to stop getting you to buy into these teams who have no good wins, man. Like we have UNC last week. We have the conversation, no good wins. Now Georgia. So, I mean, hey, you like?
But what are you? If I turn out to be right, I expect an apology.
I'm not saying anything, but every time you come up and talk up a team, it's like, oh, they haven't beat anyone, but they have close losses. So I don't really care either way. You can believe whatever you want to believe, and you might be right. I think I don't know if I picked Georgia to win this week, but I definitely thought about it. I know I had to pick Kentucky against them. I don't know if I picked them against Oklahoma. You might have to scroll and find it for me, but I thought about it. Their performance against Ole Miss on Saturday kind of turned me off to them, but that to me is. We'll have to, almost like they have to prove it first before I can pick them to win 2 big games in a week, but they are both at home, so we'll see what happens. All right, Greg, let's go to Arizona beating Cincinnati on the road. I'm glad we're getting a chance to talk about this one because as you said a couple weeks ago, Greg, Cincinnati might be in a little bit of danger. Now they are at 0-2 in conference because these were 2 of the games they probably should have won. This week they also lost to Kansas State. And then my contention was Arizona would win this game, and they did, and it was an ugly game. They won 72-67. Caleb Love won 3 of 15 from the field with 12 points, which, again, kind of speaks to what I said preseason, which was like the fit of the team is still super weird, and it's not totally right, but they get the win, and, we already talked about last week, Greg, how, like, UC might have issues now, so and they probably do. We're going to talk, like, they have a big week coming up, and they have 2 big games in the Big 12, so we'll talk about them, I'm sure, a little bit later. But Arizona, who a team I said I don't know if they could finish top 5 in the Big 12, I think was the exact quote, I don't know if they can finish top 5 in the Big 12, they are very much like the teams, I'm glad we brought this up, very much like the teams that we just talked about, right? Like, they have all their losses, especially now after the last week, are to teams that are good teams. At Wisconsin, Duke, Oklahoma, West Virginia, UCLA. They just don't have a big win. So Cincinnati was their big win. Cincinnati was in the top 25. Now they're out of it. And for a team that Ken Pom loves so much and the net loves so much, and all their losses are good, I think maybe they can finish top 5 in the Big 12. I don't know if that says more about Arizona or the Big 12, though. So I'm kind of changing my stance on them. I still don't like watching them play. It's still very ugly basketball. I don't know how they rank that high efficiently, Greg. I don't know if you have a different take on that about how they're ranking that high because it looks awful. But to me, maybe they're not in as big of danger as I thought they were.
I don't know, man. Like, if you'd have told me, like, hey, Caleb Love's going to go 3 of 15, and, like, all right, they lose.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow they win the game. It's one of those things where it's some of these results, like, you can explain it. Like, we've talked about several different results where you're like, all right, like I can logic my way into why that happened or how that happened. Like, this is one where it's like you'd think they go as Caleb Love goes, and I guess the bench production, they nearly had all 3 bench players in double figures. I guess that's where they made their money in this game. And Jaden Bradley had, I think he had a late bucket that helped them seal the deal. But it's like one of those things where, I started talking myself into, after watching UC go through a couple of games, I started talking myself into like, okay, maybe it wasn't, like UD playing bad. Maybe it really was the UC defense. Like, I let myself get talked into something. And again, I'm not saying like, oh, I think they're horrendous or anything, but like I think I started to give them a little more credit than they deserve. They're probably a middle of the pack Big 12 team, which I think relates back to what you're saying is like that might not be that great. Like, this is not the Big 12 that we're used to seeing, and it's not just because there's a couple of new teams added into it. Like, I don't even like. You think about it, like if Texas and Oklahoma were still in the Big 12, like they're not. They both have some decent firepower and star power, but like not really much to shake a stick at in terms of like the national landscape. So like this isn't just like, well, the Big 12 lost, Texas and Oklahoma, so that's why no, this is not that. Like I just think some of these programs are down this year. Not meeting the expectations that we had in the preseason for them. We just got done talking about Baylor, and actually that's which is peeking at UC schedule. I mean, coming up this week, Baylor, at Baylor and home against Kansas. I mean, you better win one of those, or it's going to start getting, it might turn into one of those things where like, all right, they go on a run and they beat, Colorado, Arizona State, Texas Tech, but like you're going to lose your opportunities to get your staple wins. This is kind of what we already brought up with UC as far as their Big 12, schedule goes. It's like there's not a ton of opportunities. It's like the antithesis of the SEC right now, where it's like you look at any given night and you have an opportunity to do something. But the Arizona team, I think early in the year I can't remember the exact wording that I said, but I said something like, I don't know, Joe, I think there's something to this team, and you're like, I don't know, Greg, outside of Caleb Love, and here we are talking about a game where Caleb Love is like, yeah, he leads, he's second leader in scoring in the game, but like extremely inefficient, and they still find a way. Like that to me might say more about where UC is at than Arizona. So I don't walk away from this game like knowing what to do with either team. It's just gonna depend on how they play coming up. And I think Arizona has a little bit of a lighter Big 12 schedule as well. They do have West Virginia this week. They actually have them tomorrow. That was a game I considered putting in our picks, but I was like, I don't know. It's kind of a packed week. Like that game, I feel like, well, I don't even know if West Virginia comes away winning that game, if I'm going to put my stamp on them and say like, all right, I'm ready to, I'm ready to, count on them. But like if they're, if Tucker DeVries and company is still out and they win that game, like I don't know how I'm going to feel about Arizona. I just like I'm in limbo with both of these teams that played in this game. UC's going to have more opportunities this week, so they kind of have an opportunity to give me an idea of which way I think they're going to go. Arizona, I have no clue. Which is a team that was were they 9th in the preseason poll? That's a lot to say about them.
Yeah, this is like the month that you kind of like, if you had a tough non-conference schedule, which Arizona did, they just didn't beat anyone. This is your chance to find yourself and mold yourself. And like by February, I kind of want to know what I think about these teams, and we will, because conference play will get that out of them. But you're right. Like if Arizona wins at West Virginia, it kind of gives you a little bit more hope. But if they lose, then it's still like, to me, like, hey, you're still kind of like on the fraud watch here, right? Like it's not great that you're losing to West Virginia, who has down some of their players, and even though they beat Kansas, like that's still not great for your resume. It's not great for your chances, and you're at that point you're at 8-6, and like, yeah, we're gonna see teams close to 500 making the NCAA tournament this year because of the expanded conferences and everything, but it's definitely a weird team to figure out. And I think it's like one of those teams that people don't want to see make the NCAA tournament. Like, they're not the greatest team right now, and they haven't beaten anyone good, but like, in the same sense, like, I think that maybe you're saying with North Carolina, like, they only have losses to good teams. Arizona, if say they make the tournament and they're like one of the last teams in, because that's where they are right now probably, if in at all. Caleb Love goes off for 30 points in the game, and you might be out of the tournament. And the same thing with R.J. Davis or Ian Jackson, who's having a very good week, 2 weeks for the North Carolina. So that's what's going to stink, is we might not be able to see some of these players in March if they don't get things together quickly. So we're going to keep tabs on Arizona. That is too big of a program not to in the next couple weeks. Greg, let's move over to Sunday.
Before you move on, I do want to I not really expand, but I think you put Arizona in a good box where it's almost like this Eli Manning wild card-esque, like, don't let them get into the first four, or God forbid Caleb Love, because when he's on, and he had a really his most efficient year last year, so he's even for him taking a little bit of a step back. But God forbid, do not let them, get into the tournament, because that is like all the ingredients for him having 30, 35, 2 straight games, and all of a sudden they're, as an 11 seed beating teams that we thought, had a chance to make a run, and it's just because of they have one guy. Like this is what we talked about when we talked about, like, they know if they get down situationally who the ball is going to. They know where it's going. They know who they're going to lean on, and it's one of those for better or worse things, right? It may work out for them, or it may not. But I would definitely, if I'm sitting in Dayton at the first four, this is not a team I would want to be facing. Not necessarily because of how they're playing, but with that, like, that untapped potential that could be there.
Right, and honestly, like I said, the situation's not good for the start of the season, but who's to say they don't figure it out and get more help around Caleb Love by the end of the season, or, Caleb Love plays more efficiently because he's more used to his teammates. All that stuff is on the table, so still, like, in the same way, again, with North Carolina, who almost lost to Notre Dame, we're not going to talk about that game because they ended up winning, but Notre Dame's not a very good team this year, and they almost lost on the road to Notre Dame. Like, you don't want to play that team when they have 2 guys who can just go off and kill you, so it's just, we'll watch out for it. We're going to probably pick those teams to pick off some of these really good teams coming up in conference play at different points, so it'll be fun to watch. Greg, let's move on to Sunday for the last game we're going to recap. We have the Oregon Ducks beating Maryland 83-79. Sorry. We have Jackson Shelstead having one of his best games of the season with 23 points. And, this Oregon team, I think, is still flying a little bit under the radar. Yeah, they lost to Illinois, but, like, I said earlier, like, they're going to have something to say with this Big Ten race when it's all said and done, whether they win it or maybe they beat, like, one of the top teams at the end of the race. That's going to be interesting to watch. And then, for Maryland, for me, I don't know about you, Greg, every time I watch them, it is a lot about just watching Derek Queen and watching him work, because he is just amazing to watch.
Yeah, I mean, they got, Jacoby Gillespie's having a great year too, so don't, it's not just a one-man team. And, you can't forget about, former top 100 Julian Reese. He's had some games here and there, but Oregon, it's just, again, I'm with you. It's like, I think they're good. Obviously, the margin of defeat to Illinois, that stinks. But this Maryland team is good. And even though it's at home, like, I will take this as a good win for Oregon. You'd rather have the Illinois game be closer, but this is not like, just because there's no number next to Maryland's name doesn't mean they're not any good or anything. Like Joe already mentioned, Derek Queen is having one heck of a year for a freshman, or not even just for a freshman, but just in general. Mm-hmm. I think this team might mess around, and we might look up and all of a sudden, late, speaking about Maryland, late in the season, they break their way into the top 25 because they pick off, a couple of these good Big Ten teams. Not saying they're going to be, a Final Four or Elite Eight threat or anything, but they could mess around and have something to say about at least, ending somebody's march, as a, I don't know, what do you think, like maybe a 5 or a 6 seed. Could get even better if they win, a couple of these big games that they have coming up. I just looked at their schedule. They have UCLA this week. Again, another game that I thought about putting on our picks, but I left it off. We got Illinois coming up in a couple of weeks. I mean, there's going to be opportunities for them. They don't get Purdue. That's a game I would have loved to have seen. But again, just with these expanded conferences, that's kind of the way that. I'm sorry, no, they already got Purdue. I forgot some of these games are way earlier because of how extended the conference season is, and they did hang tough in that game. So, but that's one of their losses. Tough trip out west. They lose to Washington the other day as well. We'll just have to keep tabs on them, but I think they're good.
I think they're good too. An underrated part of this team is Selton Miguel, shooting 41% from 3. He's a USF transfer. Had fun watching him last year on USF. He's going to be the guy who opens things up for this offense, spreads the floor for Derek Queen to let him work. And Julian Reese, who, Greg, I don't know if you know. Who's his sister?
Nah.
Yeah.
He's going by something different this year too. I think he's going by Juju or something. I saw somewhere someone referred to him as not Julian. I can't remember what it was, but I I think he's one. We've got like 3 dudes that are in the national spotlight, or at least in a power conference that like are going by a different name than they did last year. But Angel Reese, I'm assuming, is where we're going. I had just he's been at Maryland for 4 years, and I had no idea.
I think is it. I guess it's Angel Reese is his older sister, but yeah, I guess she was in college too a long time. But yeah, it's interesting, and I'm sure it'll be a story if he goes to March and Angel Reese is at the games. That'll be kind of fun to watch her supporting her brother. So yeah, I think Zelton Miguel's going to open things up for this offense, and I think with Maryland we kind of like underrated them because like we knew like kind of thought Derek Green would be good, but we didn't know how the guard play was going to be, and like Miguel opening things up, and then the other guards playing well as well. Maybe even better than we thought. Is going to be good for them. They needed to get on the right track. They're only 1-3 in conference play. They struggled on this road trip and lost to Purdue, as you mentioned, Greg. And they have a chance to do that. They're at home against UCLA and home against Minnesota. So we'll make sure they kind of keep things rolling here because they would be a fun team to watch in March. With all that being said, all right, let's get to our picks for the week, Greg. We're going to start it off on Tuesday, and we have a conference game. We have Tuesday. We have Florida and Tennessee. Sorry, I'm kind of going over my words here. Tennessee and Florida. This one is at Florida, number 1 in the country versus number 8. Despite Florida losing, they stay pretty high in the rankings. Going to be an absolute barn burner, in my opinion, Greg. I'm excited to watch these conflicting styles go at each other, but also a lot of guys who can make some shots.
Yeah, I think this might be the game of the week. Coming pretty early in the week, but I do. I feel like this is the game I'm looking most forward to. Happy that it comes on a night where, at least in terms of marquee games, there's any night of the week you look this week, there's other basketball to watch. Caveat for any games that we pick this week, like I really tried to boil it down. Like Joe and I don't need to sit here and spend another hour picking games. I tried to pick the best of the best, but there is so much going on this week. There's basketball on any night of the week that you might want to turn on. I will take tennis. I'm sorry. I want to make sure I stay consistent with my.
You're taking Florida, bud.
Taking Florida. Okay, I was like, I scrolled down too far. I scrolled down to Tennessee's next game at Texas, and I was like, wait a minute, I'm not taking Tennessee. I'm taking Florida. Just really liked how they performed. In the Kentucky game. There's nothing wrong with this Tennessee team, but I like Florida to win this game.
Yeah, I mentioned Florida, I think, in our preseason show as a team that I kind of liked better than most people did. And, I mean, the reason is, like, not even, like, we can still have debates about how, like, their schedule, like, a lot like Tennessee's, like, they played some teams who we thought would be better, whether that's Virginia or, Florida State or Wake Forest, whoever you want to talk about, in North Carolina as well. Their guards are so good, and they have 2 big guys on the floor, and they do the offensive rebounding thing with Shinya Liu and Condon. So I like the structure of this team. I think this might be a Final Four pick for me for Florida. I think they're that good, and I think Walter Clayton is just he's must-watch TV and a guy that maybe not a lot of people know about. He was in Florida last year, but then he was at Iona before that. So if you're like a casual fan or like just watch him march, like watch him. He'll be fun to watch. So I'm going Florida in this one. I think the difference in this one, Greg, is like I think if they get up early, sometimes the Kai Ziegler kind of presses too much. Rick Barnes has even said like his biggest problem as a point guard, not a player, but a point guard is like one thing will go wrong and then he doesn't like calm down and like another bad thing will go wrong. He lets it kind of flood, and you don't want that out of a point guard. So I think in this game specifically, with so much pressure possibly to keep up with Florida, who is very good at scoring the ball, 5th in the country, that's going to be tough. So I'm going to go Florida to win this one at home and give Tennessee the first loss of the season. All right, so also on Tuesday, we have Cincinnati and Baylor, 2 teams that are no longer ranked, Greg, but an interesting matchup because, like you said, outside of those top 3-4 teams in the Big 12, we're really looking for who might step up here.
Yeah, I picked this game to put in I just think it's a pivotal game for both teams. I don't necessarily think we made like walk away. Obviously the game will play out how it plays out, and what happens in the game, might turn your head one way or the other. But like the result in and of itself, I don't think is going to put a rubber stamp on what I think of one team or the other. But when you do look at the bigger picture, like UC could mess around and all of a sudden they're on a 4-game losing streak because I also have us picking Kansas. Kansas is coming to I almost called it the Shoemaker Center. It's not Shoemaker Center anymore. It's oh my goodness, I'm blanking on it.
Fifth Third.
What is UC's Fifth Third Bank Arena? All right. So they've got this is a big week for UC because if you lose, and yeah, it is at Baylor. You lose that game, and then you lose against Kansas. All of a sudden, you're 0-4 in conference, and not only 0-4 in conference, but 0-4 and missing a lot of your big opportunities. To have statement wins, right?
Mm-hmm.
For Baylor, on the other side, like again, I don't think like a win over UC is gonna rubber stamp anything for them, but like you want to get, if we want to see this Baylor team turn into anything, you want to get kind of on the right side of things. This is a game that it's at home. They should win this game. I'm picking Baylor in this game. It might spell a little bit more trouble. Just again, because it's like if you're losing this game at home, like I don't know where I'm gonna. Again, I'm still not ready to, like, even if they lose this game, not ready to write them off. And again, maybe it's just one of those teams that I have trouble quitting because we could look up in a couple of weeks and they beat, they go on a run and they beat Kansas and Houston, whatever. But it's just, I think it's probably going to be a turning point for one of these teams at least to, or maybe it can kind of be the moment where we saw, all right, the team that won this game, went on to win, their next three, or the team that lost this game, just they couldn't get out of the rut. It smells like that to me, where it's going to be one of those type deals.
Yeah, I'm going Baylor too. I mean, they still have the pieces, I think, to win this game at home. The offense will be good. The defense may not be quite as good, but the Cincinnati's offense has struggled at times. Obviously, we just talked about the Arizona game and how ugly it was. And I don't know. I think that Kansas State game was so important for them to win, just to kind of get one Big 12 win. I think they're just going to slide, kind of like you mentioned, and maybe lose these next two and then get back on the right track, which isn't a great strategy. But that would put them at 10-5 overall. Like, you can still rebound and make the tournament and still reach all your goals for the year. I've seen a lot of Cincinnati fans post about firing Wes Miller, and like I kind of like, I'm starting to get why they're doing that, because they're fans. As a person who does not cheer for Cincinnati, I would love if they fired him, because I think he actually is a good coach. You got to remember, this program was not in a good spot when they hired him. He went from the AAC for 2 years over to the Big 12 last year and won 22 and 15 in his first year in the Big 12. Pretty good season by all measures, given that they were adjusting to a new conference, in the toughest conference in basketball last year. And this year they're 10-3, and it's like, yeah, it stinks that you started off 0-2 in conference, and it stinks that you weren't ready to play. But I'm not ready to pull that cord, especially because, like, he put a pretty good roster together. Like, I think the X's and O's are there too. I think it's just been a little bit tough to get things rolling, and that's fine. But like, I would absolutely, like, again, as a person who doesn't like Cincinnati, and I'm not like a very anti-Cincinnati person, but I don't cheer for them. I cheer for other teams. Like, if they want to fire them, like, go ahead. I think that's a bad move. So I think they get back on track. I think it's going to take a little bit longer with this tough schedule.
Yeah, I had a visceral reaction to that. That would be dumb to me. But I mean, like, here's the question, and this is again, this is a little bit of a tangent. I'm not going to add anything to what you said, except if you kind of maybe push forward and say, let's say, I don't think this is going to happen, but like, if he's fired from UC and Hubert Davis is fired, is that still a situation where does Carolina look past like the craziness of what would be I don't think that's going to happen, but like, I have to think like Carolina would be smart enough to say, like, all right, maybe we should have hired him the first time. Like, yeah, Hubert took us to, the Final Four and whatnot with Roy's dudes, but I just like, I said years ago when it was Steele and Wes Miller, I was like, I like the projection going forward of this Cincinnati program better than Xavier. Now, obviously, Sean Miller back in the picture makes it a little bit different, but that seems ridiculous to me. Like, they had a really good year last year. Already beaten Xavier and UD this year. Yeah, the Big 12's not as good. It's and they might slide a little bit, but like, this is not a team that like looks bad out there or like is pathetic or anything. Like, it's not like one of those situations. It's just, they're not like an elite team, and I didn't think they were an elite team, but they have some potential. Like I definitely think this is a team that could win a game in the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
Probably not two, but weird things happen. George Mason made the Final Four, so weird things have happened. Just on my mind since we talked about Larranaga last week, but that to me is insanity. Like,
well, here's what I'll say, Greg. If they don't make the tournament this year, then yes, next year is a hot seat year. Where if they don't make the tournament again next year, that's 3 straight years in the Big 12. You didn't make the tournament. Like, you did a good job getting them to compete in the Big 12, but maybe not make the tournament. That's gonna be tough. But that's where we have to watch this rest of the Big 12 schedule here.
To me, it's fine to say it's a hot seat year next year, but if there's any conversation of like, if they don't make the tournament, and is he or is he not fired this offseason, like especially in a Big 12 where there's just going to be not as many opportunities as there usually were, like everything is going to be emphasized. Every loss is going to mean more, and all of that. I'm with you. I'd be like, great. Go ahead.
I still think he's a good coach. There probably is a world if the whole season bottoms out completely and they don't win another game this season. Sure, he's fired, right? That makes sense.
Well, but yeah, if they don't win, if they Louisville the end of the year, like fine.
That's not where we're going for.
That's not going to happen.
I think they will be on the bubble at the very least at the end of the year. And if they're on the bubble at least, I think that keeps him his job for another year. And then if you want to say next year hot seat because he hasn't made the tournament, that's fine. But I do think he's a good coach. He put a good roster together, and I do think they get something done. I just don't think this is the game for him. I think these next two games are tough, and maybe they come away with a win, and that gets restored faith for Cincinnati. But that's going to be we'll come right back to Cincinnati after this next pick because we got to go to Texas A&M Oklahoma. That is on Wednesday. Greg, an old Big 12 matchup here now happening in the SEC. So who are you going with in this one?
I am taking, I believe it's Texas A&M, but again, I want to confirm that I didn't. I just want to stay consistent. Yeah, I'm taking Texas A&M on the road. I am picking a lot of what I would assume to be favorites this week. I'm not picking a ton of road teams. This is one of the road teams that I'm picking. We just kind of talked about, yes, Oklahoma had a hot start to the year in terms of record, but like, what did they play in? They played in what MTE did they play in? They played in the Bahamas, right? And like the Bahamas, like the teams in the Bahamas turned out to be not as great and whatnot, but a little bit of a hey, it's two dudes, and obviously this Texas A&M team has had its ups and downs, but I think they're figuring things out a little bit. You can't just pick every home team and every favorite, so. I guess I'll pick. I don't know if Texas A&M will be. I don't know what the line will be like on this one, but I would think it's either going to be like a pick 'em or Texas A&M maybe be favored, even though it's on the road. But I'll take Texas A&M here.
Yeah, I'm back in on Texas A&M. We talked about early in the season, Greg not letting me believe in them anymore, and then they won some big games, and I'm back in. So love Wade Taylor. I love how much help they've gotten him this season, so he's not having to score as many points, and I like. Again, it's probably frustrating if you're watching the team, but I like that they have a rotation of big guys to throw. So if someone gets going for Oklahoma, you can start fouling, and like you have guys on the bench ready to go to step in. So Texas A&M win this one for me. Greg, let's go right back to Cincinnati. We talked about it. Kansas and Cincinnati. This one's at home for Cincinnati, which is good, but tough call here having to beat Kansas.
I mean, this could be a product of getting Kansas at the right time. I'm picking Kansas, but like. If we're sitting here and talking about, next week, like, oh, this is how UC beat Kansas, it might again just be a product of, Kansas last week, lose to West Virginia and then annihilate UCF. You don't know which Kansas team you're going to get. I still am with you. We kind of said already on this pod, count on Bill Self to figure it out. I don't think, UC wins this game. I think Kansas probably takes it by 15 or more. But if we were to have that conversation next week, I think that's kind of like the frame of mind we'd be putting it in is like, hey, it's just you caught them at the right time. I wouldn't want to be playing them later in the year. I wouldn't want to be playing them in, late February or early March kind of thing. But I'm not really worried about them losing this game. This is a game we had talked about going to possibly, but a little bit of a scheduling change. We can talk about that in the close. But so I won't be able to go to this game. Maybe you can. But
Mhm.
this is just kind of, again, we already kind of, not to reiterate anything, just a big week for UC. So Baylor and Kansas, they lose both. It's not necessarily, it is a slide, but it's not, a doom to their season or anything. But it would be really helpful for them to get one of these wins. It would be extremely helpful for them to get the win at home against Kansas. I think that one will age very well for them if they were able to pull it off. I don't think they will. But I think that you could put all the Wes Miller crazies to bed if they were to win this singular game.
Yeah, it was crazy. I saw more than one person on Twitter doing it, so it's just kind of crazy. But no, I think Cincinnati is capable of winning this game, and I kind of like their chances in this one better because of Kansas's flaws. I'm picking Kansas because I think they're going to figure that out this week specifically, kind of get things back on track. And I do think they have the talent, and Bill Self will figure it out, like we talked about earlier. Cincinnati, though, if they want to win, you need Jizzle James to play well in this game. You need to have him do pick and rolls where Hunter Dickinson switches on him, and then he either shoots or gets to the basket as the primary ball handler. That is what needs to happen. If you want to beat them, that's what you have to do. You have to shoot threes and extend and have KJ Adams and Hunter Dickinson leave the paint, and then they struggle to guard outside of the paint. So it's all possible. They have shooters. They have Jizzle James who can handle the ball. I'm going to go Kansas, though. I need to see more from this team before I can pick them in such a big game. This is like they have a chance to execute and get to where they want to be, but we haven't seen it yet, and I need to see that. So I'm going Kansas in this one, but opportunity, doors open. So next one up, we have Alabama and Texas A&M. Picking Texas A&M twice this week too, so a lot of teams who are doubling up on big games. Greg, who are you going with?
I am going with, again, want to check our. I don't want to give the wrong pick again like I did last time. I can't imagine I picked anything other than Alabama, but I want to check Alabama. They're rolling on all cylinders right now. The game is yes, it's at Texas A&M, and like that's good for Texas A&M and whatnot. But didn't we already get this matchup? Is this what I'm remembering as what we got in the Vegas tournament? Is this the one that we got already as a non-con? I know there wasn't it two SEC teams that played against each other as a non-conference? Or am I thinking? Am I misremembering that?
Don't think
I know
so.
We got at some point we got. No, it wasn't. There was an intra-conference matchup that was put as a non-conference, but it wasn't. For some reason, I was remembering it. I think they were both there, but I don't. They did not. I'm looking at the schedule right now. They did not play. I know at some point in one of these MTEs we got like a intra-conference game that counted as non-conference, and I think they were both at the Vegas one, so that's what made me think of that. But I will take Bama in this game. I'm looking at the schedule right now. A&M play Rutgers and whatnot, so they were at that Vegas as well. So that's what made me think that we already have this matchup, but we did not. So this thankfully will be a new one.
Yeah, I'm going Bama too. Texas A&M has the capability to beat Bama, but I think they're going to stretch out the defense of Texas A&M, and I think it'll be tough to keep up with. So I'm going to go Alabama, especially that Mark Sears is playing better now. I think they can kind of get things going offensively and get the win on the road. All right, the last one we're going to pick this week, Greg, we have Kentucky at Mississippi State. So Kentucky, as you mentioned earlier, playing at Georgia, playing at Mississippi State. A little bit of a tough week here in the SEC for them. This will be at 8:30 Saturday on SEC Network.
I am going to pick Kentucky, even though they are on the road. Again, if I'm going to pick them to lose to Georgia early in the week, I'm going to pick them to have a get-right game, even against a tenacious defense like Mississippi State. I'll stop there and let you speak because I think you got something for us here.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mississippi State's going to be favored in this game. I think they're going to win. I think Kentucky probably wins the early matchup against Georgia. I think this one's a little bit tougher. It's not just a tough defense for me. It's like Josh Hubbard averaging 17.7 points per game. Kentucky's shown there's issues on defense guarding specifically guards around the perimeter. So, I think this is a really good team, and they have Josh Hubbard kind of leading the way, which, again, I think is good to have like a guy you're going to go to. But they have a lot of other guys who are really good contributors, whether just on defense or even helping score double-digit points. They have 4 double-digit scorers this year. I'm a big fan of this Mississippi State team. And I think Josh Hubbard is a player that like maybe people got a little bit introduced to last year, but again, one of those guys that we want to see in March. We want to see have those moments. He's kind of a smaller guy, but can really light up the scoreboard, can really set up his teammates too. So I think this is a game that Mississippi State might be favored by 2-3 points coming in, maybe a little bit more. The Hump is a tough place to play at, and when you have a guy like Josh Hubbard in that defense rolling with Kentucky not being able to shoot the ball all the time well on the road, like that makes things even tougher. So I think Mississippi State wins this one, and kind of like puts a feather in their cap and kind of moves up the rankings, and then we'll see how they do because I think this is more matchup. Like they're I don't know if they're a better team than Kentucky, but having them at home and kind of like the matchup they have, if they can get Kentucky to miss some perimeter threes, I think they can win this one.
Joe, just to lend credence to what you just said about Kentucky struggling on the perimeter and to cover guards, 33 for Clayton and 26 for Elijah Martin on Saturday against Florida. So I think that's a good thought, to where they would struggle in this game. Just wanted to point that out. I don't think we specifically pointed that out, but that goes right along with what you just said as a weakness. So wanted to make sure that people know that there's numbers to back out what Joe's saying.
Oh yeah, and Bruce Thornton for Ohio State had 30 points, so it's out there, man. They struggle with those guards, and if Hubbard has, it might come down to that. Honestly, it might come down to if Hubbard can help Mississippi State outscore Kentucky. Even if Mississippi State plays good against Kentucky, like they might limit them to 75, 80 points. And like if Josh Hubbard can score his 17, 18 points per game, then they win. Maybe if he doesn't, they lose. So could come down to that, and I do think he's a very good player that is worth watching. So that goes 1-1 for us for Kentucky this week for both of us, but you have them winning the first game, or losing the first game and winning the second. I have them losing the first game and we're winning the first game and losing the second. I'm saying it all backwards. Everyone gets what we're talking about, though. Mississippi State is a win for me. Kentucky's a win for you. Greg, that is our last pick of the week. Do you have any final thoughts for the week?
Just the one thing I alluded to. We're going through my wife and I's 5-year anniversary this weekend. We're going to Indianapolis. We've been a couple of times just for this, that, and the other. And I'm going to see my first game in Hinkle. I guess I got to say, weather permitting. There's like 10 inches of snow on the ground right now, but I have to hope that it'll be clear by this weekend. So this is a Saturday 11 a.m. game. Butler and Creighton. If you'd have told me that at the beginning of the year, I'd have probably been like, sweet, I get to see Creighton and Hinkle. Obviously injuries and performing below what they were supposed to be, but hey, I still get to see a game in Hinkle for the first time, so looking forward to that.
Yeah, Greg, you'll love it. It is a nice arena, especially with the history. You have to watch Hoosiers before you, again, I know you've watched it before, but watch it again before you go. And even if the game's not good, you'll have fun there. Couple last thoughts from me, Greg. Marquette, Sean Jones is out for the season. He tore his ACL last year. That is something that, Shaka Smart kind of intimated that he'd be back by now. So that's something to watch out for. I think maybe Cam Jones playing so well at point kind of gets them to oh, we maybe don't need you. You're not 100% healthy. Let's not rush you back. Just sit out this rest of the year. It's kind of my vibe on it. And then the other thing too, game to watch out to that's under the radar. I'm not picking this. I'm picking Iowa State to win. It's in our picks, but Iowa State at Texas Tech. Texas Tech is 10-3 on the year. They don't have the best resume, but Lubbock is a very tough place to play, and we're going to see people get picked off in the Big 12. So if I had to throw another game out there, Iowa State, Texas Tech is it's on Saturday. It's Saturday at 2 p.m. ESPN. I don't know if I really think Texas Tech can keep it close just based on neutral site, but because they're at Texas Tech, I'm going to say watch out for that one. That could be one of the ones where Iowa State kind of lets their guard down a little bit. All right, my turn to remind everyone to like and subscribe to the podcast, whether you get that Apple, Spotify, wherever you get that, and also to like and subscribe on YouTube to the Gamehouse YouTube channel. That's all we got for this week. For now, we'll see you guys next time.